Firstly, let's talk about definition. What does it mean cephalometric? Word cephalometric consists of two parts: cephalo, it means head, and metric or measurements. So cephalometry is the analysis and the interpretation of standardized radiographs of the facial bones. Contents of our lecture: introduction, history, characteristics, landmarks, planes, conclusion, and of course references. Introduction. Cephalometric radiographs are used in orthodontic diagnosis to evaluate the pre-treatment dental and facial relationship of a patient, to evaluate changes during treatment, and to assess tooth movement and facial growth at the end of treatment. In the cephalometric assessment, certain carefully defined points are located on the radiographs, and linear and angular measurements are made from these points. The expressions of these measurements in various ways produce analysis of skeletal size and form. History. Interest in measuring the human form and skull has been around for millennia. The history of cephalometric analysis stems from Egyptian and Greek attempts at human body measurement, anthropometrics. The term cephalometric is sometimes confused with craniometric. The former refers to measurement of the skull. The latter refers to measurement of the head, including the soft tissue, be it living or dead. All history of cephalometric analysis is divided into pre-Röntgen and Röntgen parts. 4,000 years before Christ, Egyptians wrote canon of proportions. It was a mathematical system developed to give idealistic proportions to the human form. Artistic forms were generated using a grid system. Evidence of attempts at orthodontics and tooth bringing system using the wires have been found among the human remains of ancient civilizations. The idea that modern-day orthodontics may have originated thousands of years ago is centrally intriguing. This remaining ancient physical evidence of attempts at orthodontics indicates that the dentition and facial appearance were as important then as they are today. Although not strictly related to cephalometric contributions, attempts down through time have been made to qualify and quantify the human form by type. I hope you know this man. It is father of medicine, Hippocrates. Hippocrates described two body types: habitus physicus, long thin body, and habitus apoplecticus, short thin body. Kretschmer in 1921 proposed his own classification of humans' body types: ascenic, it means thin, small and weak; athletic, muscular, large boned; picnic, stocky, fat; and dysplastic, unproportionate body. Sheldon, American psychiater, in 1954 proposed divide humans' body types into three types: endomorph, tending toward body fat; mesomorph, tending toward musculature; and ectomorph, tending forward undeveloped muscle. Like here: ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph. You know this man too. It is Leonardo da Vinci, arguably the first to try and systematically measure the head. It is part of his scientist's work, where he described and measured and tried to find proportions of human's cranium. Albrecht Dürer, you know, it is artist, but he treatise on cranial measurements was the first published work in which anthropometry was applied to aesthetic. And of course, you know Pierre Fauchard, published The Surgeon Dentist in 1728. Some consider him to be the inventor of orthodontics. Some of the less than modern methods of straightening teeth included finger pressure, mental plates, lash to abutment teeth, extractions, and the use of the surgical instrument of the time, called the pelican. This instrument was used to make a large phospholingual to buccal tip in movement. Petrus Camper introduced the facial angle, facial line, and horizontal plane, called Camper horizontal line. Joachim Lafolion coined the term orthodontia. He wrote his work Dentistry in 1841. Andrews Retzius, credited with introducing the terms orthognathic, prognostic, and the cephalic index. And modern era of cephalometry, Röntgen leads the way. In 1895, Röntgen discovered X-rays. Röntgen discovered X-rays in 1895 and submitted the paper on a new kind of rays, a preliminary communication. The following year, Koenig and Walkhoff simultaneously made the first dental X-ray of a tooth. But, doctors, there are few features. In 1881, Ukrainian scientist Ivan Poluy discovered and patented X-ray lamp. It was 14 years before Röntgen. But due to some events, Ivan Poluy was forgotten. 1922, Paul Simon becomes the first to use planes and angles in the diagnosis of dental anomalies. 1948, William Downs is credited with developing the first cephalometric analysis. Over the ensuing years, multiple cephalometric analysis methods have been established. But Downs' analysis is used till nowadays. And many other doctors, like Steiner, Twiss, Sassoon, Harvard, Twiss, Ricketts, McNamara, Jarabak, proposed their own analysis. So, doctors, I found this picture. It is a picture of School of Dental Medicine, University of Pennsylvania, 1915. You can see how many students studied at that school. Let's talk about characteristics.
This video will show you how to perform a Progeny Vantage panoramic cephalometric exam. Before conducting any clinical procedure, service, or maintenance operation, always refer to the appropriate technical documentation for the complete list of instructions, safety alerts, and sequence of procedures. The following steps will be covered in this video. First, choose the appropriate Ceph functions. Second, explain the exam to the patient. Third, properly position the patient.
The following steps will be
and
covered
last,
in this video.
acquire the image.
First, choose the
To
appropriate
begin,
Ceph
tap
functions.
the projection button on the
Second,
top right of the
explain the
Vantage Touch
exam
control
to the
screen
patient.
to select the Ceph
Third,
function.
properly position
Verify
the
the
patient.
technique factors according
And
to
last,
patient size
acquire the
and
image.
anatomy. Next,
To begin,
determine the
tap
Ceph
the
study
projection
needed for the
button on the
patient
top right
and select
of the
desired
Vantage Touch
function.
control screen.
To do this,
select the
there are
Ceph
three
function.
cephalostat functions,
Verify
which
the
are
technique factors
AP,
according to
the
patient
image
size
taken from the anterior
and
to the
anatomy.
posterior of the head,
Next,
or
determine the
nasal
Ceph
toward the
study
tooth
needed
head.
for the patient
PA,
and select
the
desired
image
function.
taken from the posterior
To
to
do
the
this, there
anterior
are
of
three
the head,
cephalostat
nasal
functions,
opposite
which
of
are
the
the
head,
AP,
and
the
lateral
image
left
taken from the
or
anterior
lateral
to
right.
the posterior of the head,
The otic
or
posts
nasal
are in
toward
line
the
with the
tooth
X-ray
head.
tube head.
PA,
Rotate
the
the
image taken
cephalostat
from
to
the
the proper
posterior to
position
the
based
anterior
on
of
the
the
desired
head,
function or
nasal
study
opposite
type.
the tooth head.
Rotating the cephalostat
lateral
will
left
automatically
or
configure the
lateral
system
right.
for the chosen
The otic
cephalometric
posts are
study
in
type.
line with the X-ray tube
Now
head.
that the Ceph function is
Rotate
chosen,
the cephalostat to
explain
the
the
proper
examination
position
to the
based on
patient.
the desired function or
Use a
study type.
sanitary wipe or
Rotating the
barrier on the
cephalostat will
Bayesian
automatically
marker
configure
and
the
place the
system
ear
for the chosen
speculums on the otic
cephalometric study
posts.
type.
Explain
Now that
where
the
the
Ceph
patient will
function is
stand
chosen,
under the
explain the
cephalometric
examination
attachment.
to the patient.
Ask the patient
Use
to
a
remove
sanitary
glasses
wipe
and
or
mouth
barrier
or
on the
facial
Bayesian
piercings,
marker
as well
and
as
place
a
the ear
jacket or bulky
speculums on
swab.
the otic posts.
You should now ready the
Explain
machine
where the
for
patient
imaging
will stand
to be in the
under
patient
the
entry
cephalometric
position.
attachment.
To begin the image
Ask the patient
acquisition,
to remove
tap
glasses
the Ready for
and
Imaging
mouth or
button
facial
on the
piercings,
touch control
as
panel.
well as a jacket or
The
bulky
status
sweater.
indicator flashes
You should
wait
now ready
to
the
indicate a
machine for
moving
imaging
status
to
while
be
the
in the
Vantage
patient
system
entry position.
moves to the ready
To
position.
begin the image acquisition,
Once the
tap
Vantage
the Ready
system
for
is ready to
Imaging
perform
button
a scan,
on the touch
the
control
status
panel.
indicator will change to
The
green
status
ready
indicator
state.
flashes wait
With the
to
patient
indicate a
standing
moving
next to the
status
unit,
while the Vantage
visually
system
compare the height
moves
of
to
the
the ready
patient's otic
position.
canal with the
Once the
cephalostat ear
Vantage system
posts.
is ready to perform a scan,
Adjust the height
the
of the
status indicator
cephalostat
will
until
change
the
to
ear
green
posts
ready
are
state.
approximately the height
with
of
the
the
patient
patient's otic
standing
canal.
next to the unit.
Grasp
Visually
the otic
compare the
posts
height
at the
of the
top
patient's
and
otic
move it
canal
out to position
with the
the
cephalostat
patient.
ear
The posts are designed so that they will
Adjust the
not
height of
move
the
except when
cephalostat
grasped
until the
at the
ear
top.
posts are approximately the height of the patient's
Rotate the
otic
Nazian
canal.
marker up
Grasp
and
the
help
otic
the
posts
patient
at
to
the
enter
top
the set.
and move it out to position
Using
the
the
patient.
up-down
The
control
posts
buttons
are
on the
designed so that they
secondary
will not
collimator
move
or
except when
on the
grasped
side
at
of
the
the
top.
patient positioning table.
Next,
Adjust the height
rotate
of
the
the Nazian
Nazian
system
marker up
until the
and
ear
help the
posts
patient to
are
enter the set.
approximately level with the patient.
using the up-down control buttons
Grasp
on
the
the secondary
Nazian
collimator
and slide it vertically
or
until
on
it
the side
aligns
of the
with the
patient
bridge of the
positioning
patient's
table.
nose.
Adjust the height of
Slide the
the Vantage
Nazian
system
toward the patient's
until the
nose
ear
until the
posts
tip
are approximately
contacts the
level
bridge of the
with the
nose.
patient's otic canal.
For projection, the
Grasp the
Nazian is
Nazian
not needed.
and slide it
It will
vertically
rotate about
until it
the base
aligns with the
out
bridge of the
projection
patient's
area.
nose.
The
Slide
patient's
the
head
Nazian
position
toward the
should be
patient's
reviewed
nose
to
until
make
the
sure
tip
it is correct
contacts
along
the bridge
three
of the
axes.
nose. For
From a side
projection
lateral
where the
view,
Nazian
the
is
Frankfurt
not needed,
plane,
it will rotate
of
about the
orbital
base
posts,
out of the
should
projection
be level
area.
horizontally.
The patient's head position
From a frontal
should be
view,
reviewed
the
to make
patient's
sure
face
it is
should be
correct along
straightforward
three axes.
without any twisting.
From a
Also
side
from the
lateral
front,
view, the
ensure the
Frankfurt plane
patient's head is
bottom
not tilted,
to otic
but
post
vertically straight.
should be level
With the
horizontally.
patient properly positioned,
From a frontal
ask
view,
the patient to
patient's face
close their
should be
mouth,
straightforward without
take a
any
deep
twisting.
breath and swallow,
Also from the front,
place their
ensure the
tongue on the
patient's
roof
head
of their
is
mouth,
not tilted, but
then
vertically
remain
straight.
as motionless as
With the
possible
patient
until the
properly
device
positioned,
stops moving
ask the
and they are
patient
instructed on
close
what to
their
do
mouth.
next.
Take a deep breath and swallow.
Step back at
Place
least
their
2
tongue
meters,
on the roof of
6
their
feet,
mouth.
away from the Vantage
Then
system,
remain as
but not
motionless
toward
as
the
possible
patient.
until the device
And press
stops
and
moving,
hold the
and they
exposure
are
button
instructed on
until
what
the
to do
Vantage
next.
system stops moving. When the image
Step
preview
back at
appears
least
on
2
the touch
meters,
control
6
panel,
feet, away
release
from
the
the Vantage
exposure
system,
button
but
and
not
verify
toward
the
the
image
patient.
acquired is
And
the one
press and
designed
hold the
for the
exposure
patient.
button
Tap
until the
OK
Vantage
to
system
close the
stops
image
moving.
window.
When the image
If the
preview
exposure
appears
button
on the
is
touch
released
control
before the
panel,
Vantage system
release the
stops
exposure
moving,
button
the message
and verify the
"Procedure
image
was
acquired
interrupted
is the
before
one designed
completion"
for the
appears.
patient. Tap
Click OK on
to
the
close
message
the image
window
window.
and wait for the Vantage system
If the
to
exposure
recover
button is
and
released
to
before the
determine if
Vantage
image
system
preview
stops
appears.
moving, the message
1.
"Procedure
If it
was
does,
interrupted before
verify the
completion"
accuracy of the
appears.
image.
Click
2.
OK on the
If there
message
is no
window
image
and
or the
wait for
displayed one
Vantage
is
system to
inaccurate,
recover.
retake
And
the
to
image.
determine if the image
Release the
preview
patient
will
from the
appear.
cephalometric by
1.
rotating the
If it does,
Nazian up
verify
and
the
pushing
accuracy
out
of
the
the
otic
image.
wands.
2.
Help
If
the
there is no
patient
image
exit the
or
Vantage
displayed
system.
one is inaccurate,
For more detailed information about how to perform a
release the patient from the
cephalometric examination,
by
please
rotating
refer to the
Nazian
Progeny
up and
Vantage
pushing out
Panoramic
the otic
X-ray
wands.
System User Guide.
Help the
For
patient
further support,
exit the Vantage
contact
system.
Mid-Mark
For more
Support
detailed
Services
information
at
about how to
1-800
perform a
Mid-Mark or
cephalometric
visit
examination, please refer to the Progeny
www.midmark.com.
Vantage Panoramic X-ray System User Guide. For further support, contact Mid-Mark Support Services at 1-800-MIDMARK or visit www.midmark.com.
And now, let's continue to talk about characteristics. First one. The chosen landmarks and measurements can be altered by various procedures. The comprehensive appraisal includes all of the facial bones and the cranium base reference. Measurements can be readily transferred to a study cast. Critical facial skeletal components are examined. For variations in age and sex standards are available. computerized systematic approach to measurement can be used. And now, next chapter of our lecture, landmarks. How landmarks are classified? First classification, it is classification based on the origin. Cephalometric landmarks and points are classified in the following two types: anatomical landmarks and points and derived landmarks and points. What does it mean? Anatomic landmarks and points. These landmarks represent the actual anatomic structures of the skull. Example gratia: nasion, point A, point B, ANS, anterior nasal spine, PNS, posterior nasal spine, etc. Instead of derived landmarks and points, are landmarks that have been obtained secondarily from anatomic structures in the lateral cephalogram or frontal. For example, gnathion, anterior point of occlusion, etc. Another classification: cephalometric landmarks based on structures involved. Based on hard tissue cephalometric landmarks and soft tissue cephalometric landmarks and points. Hard tissue cephalometric landmarks and points represent the actual hard tissue structures of the skull, such as nasal bone, ethmoidal bone, frontal bone, maxillary bone, mandible and hyoid, etc. Examples of hard tissue cephalometric landmarks are nasion, sella, menton, gonium, and others. But soft tissue cephalometric landmarks and points, categorized as soft tissue cephalometric and connect with soft tissues like forehead, nose, lips, chin. And examples of soft tissue cephalometric landmarks are soft tissue nasion, subnasale, stomion, soft tissue pogonion, soft tissue gnathion, and many others. Then, next group of classification: cephalometric landmarks based on the type or site involved. According to this sign, cephalometric landmarks can be unilateral or bilateral. What does it mean? Unilateral cephalometric landmarks and points are cephalometric landmarks or points situated in the midline. Examples of that points: nasion point, point A, point B, menton, etc. But bilateral cephalometric landmarks or points are cephalometric landmarks found on both right and left side. Examples of that landmarks are gonium, articulare, upper 6, lower 6, etc. And they are shown a full scheme of classification cephalometric landmarks and points. All cephalometric landmarks and points are divided into hard tissue and soft tissue, and every this group are divided into anatomic or derived, and every these subgroups are divided into unilateral and bilateral. The same. Moreover, cephalometric landmarks or points are divided into related to cranial bones, like frontal bone, nasal bone, ethmoid, temporal bone, sphenoid bone, occipital bone, dentition, mandible, maxilla, related to pharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx, and related to cervical vertebrae, like hyoid bone. Now let's talk about landmarks related to cranial bones. They divided into related to frontal bone, ethmoid bone, nasal bone, temporal bone, sphenoid bone, occipital bone, and zygomatic bone. Related to pharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx, and related to hyoid bone. Landmarks on cervical bones, related to hyoid bone or vertebrae. Moreover, landmarks on facial bone and dentition are divided into related to maxilla, to dentition, into mandible. And soft tissue cephalometric landmarks. And now let's talk more detail about different groups of cephalometric landmarks. Cephalometric landmarks related to frontal bone. As can you see, there are only 4 landmarks. First one, the most important, nasion. Abbreviation N. Nasion is abbreviated using English alphabet and is expressed as capital letter or uppercase N. Definition: nasion is the most anterior point of the frontonasal suture in the midline. This point is present almost in all cephalometric analysis. Supraorbitale point is the most anterior point of the intersection of the shadow of the roof of the orbit and its lateral contour, like on this X-ray or like on this scheme. Roof of the orbital cavity is formed by the bone between the anterior cranial base, cranial fossa above and the orbital cavity below. Main landmarks related to ethmoid bone. There are 5 landmarks, temporally neck of the cristagalli, medio-orbitali, sphenoethmoidal point and ethmoidal point. The most important are temporally. It is the intersection of the shadows of the ethmoid and the anterior wall of the infratemporal fossa, like here. Sphenoethmoidal point, the intersection of the shadow of the greater wing of the sphenoid and the cranial floor, as seen in the lateral cephalogram. Ethmoidale point. It is the deepest median point of the anterior cranial fossa, corresponding to the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Landmarks related to nasal bone. There are only 3 points: nasion, frontonasal and rhinion. Nasion point is the suture between the frontal and nasal bone. Rhinion. It is the most anterior inferior point of the tips of the nasal bones, as seen from normal lateral cephalometric X-ray. Landmarks related to temporal bone. There are only 3 points too: porion zygomatic arc and mastoidale, and the most important are porion point is the most superior point of the external auditory meatus, the superior margin of the temporomandibular joint fossa, which lies at the same level, may be substituted in the construction of the Frankfurt horizontal line. Landmarks related to sphenoid bone. As can you see, there are so much points, and the most important are next. Dorsum of sella. It is most posterior point of the internal contour of the sella turcica. Floor of sella or sella inferior. Floor of sella is the most lower point of the inner contour of the sella turcica or hypophyseal fossa. Clinoidale point. It is the most superior point of the contour of the anterior clinoid process. It is anterior border of sella turcica. And sella point is the midpoint of sella turcica or hypophyseal fossa. Pterygoid point. Pterygoid point, the most posterior point of the outline of the pterygopalatine fossa. Sometimes this point called eye kakadu. Why? Because this profile looks like kakadu, and this point localized like eye of kakadu, because this point sometimes called eye kakadu. Landmarks related to occipital bone. There are only 4 points, and the most important are Basion point. It is point at the center of the anterior border of the foramen magnum, at the base of occipital bone. Landmarks related to zygomatic bone. Only 2 points. Orbitale point is the most inferior point of the lower border of the left orbit. And temporale point, intersection of the shadows of the ethmoid and anterior wall of the infratemporal fossa. And landmarks related to facial bones and dentition. Cephalometric landmarks related to maxilla. As can you see, there are so many points, and most important are anterior nasal spine, ANS abbreviation. It is the tip of bony anterior nasal spine in the midline or median plane. And opposite point, posterior nasal spine, abbreviation PNS. The most posterior point at the sagittal plane on the bony hard palate. Point A. It is deepest point of the curve of the bone between the anterior nasal spine and dental alveolus. Prostion. Prostion is the lowermost point of alveolar process of premaxilla in the midline between 2 maxillary central incisors. Pterygomaxillary fissure is a bilateral teardrop-shaped area of radiolucency, the anterior shadow of which represents the posterior surface of the tuberosity of the maxilla. The landmark is taken where the 2 edges, front and back, appear to merge inferiorly. Next, very important landmark, orbitale. It is the lowest point on the left infraorbital margin. Cephalometric landmarks related to dentition. There are so much points too, and the most important are next. Incisions superius incisalis is the incisal edge of the maxillary central incisor. But on this scheme, this point is marked not correctly, because we must use the most protrude incisor. We need to put this point here. Incision superius apicals apex of upper central incisor is the root apex of the most anterior maxillary central incisor. If this point is needed only for defining the long axis of tooth, the midpoint of the bisection of the apical root width can be used. Incision inferius incisalis is the incisal edge of the most prominent mandibular central incisor. Incisor inferius apicalis, apex of lower central incisor, is the root apex of the most anterior mandibular central incisor. If this point is needed only for defining the long axis of the tooth, the midpoint of the bisection of the apical root width can be used. Anterior point of occlusion. For the occlusal plane, a constructed point, the midpoint of the incisor overbite in occlusion, like on this scheme. It is point of contact between upper central incisor and lower central incisor. Maxillary central incisor point is the most labial point of the crown of the maxillary central incisor. Mandibular central incisor, abbreviation L1, is the most labial point of the crown of the mandibular central incisor. Posterior point of occlusion. For the occlusal plane, the most distal point of contact between the most posterior molars in occlusion. For this patient, it is contact point between upper and lower first molars. In case of full erupted second molars, that point would be between second molars. On this scheme, this point is shoved not correctly. Must be between second molars. Maxillary first molar, U6, upper 6, is the tip of the mesiobuccal cusp of the maxillary first permanent molar. It is cusp which indicates into big key of occlusion, mesial buccal cusp. Mandibular first molar point, or L6, lower 6, is the tip of the mesiobuccal cusp of the mandibular first permanent molars. I letter means inferior. And cephalometric landmarks related to mandibula. On mandibula, there are present many different points, and the most important are next. Infradentale point is the most anterior superior point of the mandibular alveolar process, usually found near cement-enamel junction of the mandibular incisors. Point B. The point B is the deepest midline point of the mandibula between infradentale and pogonium. Pogonium point, most anterior point of mandibular synthesis. Gnathion point is a point on the chin determined by bisecting the angle formed by the facial and mandibular plane. DD point is the most prominent point of the chin in the direction of measurement. Menton point. It is the most lower point of the contour of the chin. Gonium point. The midpoint mediolaterally on the posterior border of each gonian angle. We have two gonian angles, and in case of deviating right and left angles, we need put this point in the middle between two contours. Articulare. Articulare is the point of intersection of the dorsal contours of the processus articularis mandibulare and os temporale. Intersection. Condylant point. It is the most superior point of condylum of articular head. And now let's talk about soft tissue cephalometric landmarks. They can be anatomic or derived, and everyone is divided into unilateral and bilateral. Unilateral and bilateral. First point is soft tissue glabella, marked by G or GS or capital letters SGLB, is the most prominent or anterior point in the mid-sagittal plane of the forehead at the level of the superior orbital ridges. Pronasale point is the most prominent or anterior point of the nose. Subnasale point is the point at which the nasal septum between the nostrils matches with the upper cutaneous tip of the mid-sagittal plane. Labralis superius is the most anterior point of the margin of the upper membranous lip. Stomion point is the median point of the oral embouchure when the lips are closed. Labella inferius is the most anterior point of the lower margin of the lower membranous lip. Soft tissue submentale or soft tissue point B. Hard tissue point B, localized here, but soft tissue point B or soft tissue submentale is the point of greatest concavity in the midline of the lip between labra inferius and soft tissue pogonium. And soft tissue pogonium is the most prominent or anterior point of the soft tissue chin in the mid-sagittal plane. Soft tissue gnathium is the midpoint between the most anterior and inferior points of the soft tissue chin in the mid-sagittal plane. And now, doctors, let's summarize information I told you earlier. Now let's talk about cephalometric planes. Cephalometric planes are derived from at least 2 or 3 landmarks used for measurements, separation of anatomic divisions, definition of anatomic structures of relating parts of the face to one another. And cephalometric planes are classified into horizontal and vertical planes. Horizontal cephalometric planes. Sella turcica to nasion point, SN plane, Frankfurt horizontal plane, from Porion point through Porion point and orbitally point, palatal plane between anterior nasal spine and posterior nasal spine of palatine bone, occlusal plane between contact point of first molars and central incisors, and mandibular plane. Its plane passes through gonion-gnation points. And vertical planes. Apogonion plane, point A on maxilla to pogonion on mandible. Facial plane through nasion and pogonion point. And facial axis, PTM point to gnathion point. And as a result of marking our landmarks and planes, a measurement of different facial angles. First one called facial angles. Inferior angle formed by intersection of Frankfurt horizontal line and facial plane. Average value 87.5, but can be from 82 to 95 degrees. Significance, indication of anterior-posterior positioning of mandible in relation to upper face. Increase of this angle we will observe in skeletal class 3 with prominent chin. Decreased in opposite situation in skeletal class 2. Angle of convexity. It is plane between nasion point and A point, and A point pogonion point. In normal situation, these two planes are overloaded, and average value, of course, will be 0, but can be from -8.5 to 10 degrees. Significance of this point, of this angle. Positive angle suggests a prominent maxillary dental base in relation to mandible, but negative angle is indicative of prognathic profile. AB plane angle. Plane AB between AB point, angle between AB point, AB plane and Nasion-Pogonian plane. Significance. Average value minus 4.6, but can be minus 9 degree to 0. Significance. Indicative of maxillomandibular relationship in relation to facial plane or facial vertical line. Positive in class 3 malocclusion or class 1 malocclusion with mandible prominence. Negative since point B is positioned behind point A. Y-axis. It is angle between Cephalometry to Frankfurt horizontal point, between Cephalometry line plane and Frankfurt horizontal plane. Average value 59.4, but can be normal values from 53 till 66 degrees. Significance of this angle indicates growth pattern of individual. Increased in class 2 facial pattern, vertical grown pattern of mandible, and this angle will decrease in class 3 facial patterns, horizontal growth pattern of mandible. And last cephalometric angle, mandibular plane angle. It is intersection of mandibular plane with Frankfurt horizontal plane. Average value of this angle is 21.9 degree, but from 17 to 28. And significance of this angle. A high mandibular plane angle is characterized by open bite skeletal patterns, but opposite situation, a low MPA, is characterized by closed bite skeletal patterns. And now let's see in one video pointing of that point in a base of EasyCeph computer program.
Successful calibration. Click digitize button. Calibration. Point 1. Nasion. Cella. Calibration. Point 2. Porian. Bayesian. Pterygoid. Pterygoid reference. Orbital. Click digitize button.
At first we need to calibrate
Nasion.
cephalometric X-ray.
R1. R3. Porian.
In this window they are shown tips.
Pterygoid. B point. Pterygoid reference. PM.
And their definition.
Menton.
Definition of every point.
Subgonian. Supragonian. Upper incisor edge. Upper incisor root. Lower incisor edge. Lower incisor root. PM. Occlusal plane. Pogonian. Upper molar distal. Dentin. Upper molar meshal. Subgonian. Lower molar distal. Lower molar meshal. Upper profile. Upper incisor root. Lower incisor edge. Lower incisor root. Occlusal plane. Upper molar distal. Upper molar meshal. Lower molar distal. Lower profile. Lower molar meshal. Upper profile.
We can mark profile of
Mandible
soft
outline.
tissues. And they're shown tip for us.
Lower profile. Mandible outline.
Tip
Additional
for
free
next
line.
step. And text like tip.
Additional free line. Additional free line. Additional free line. Additional free line.
Maxilla contour. Edge of orbita contour.
Additional free line.
Clinoid bone contour. Sella turcica contour.
Occlusal plane. Upper molar distal. Additional free line. Occlusal plane. Upper molar distal.
And we can choose a wanted analysis. And automatically all lines are showing. And we can correct different lines. Now it's showing correction step. Save results. And we can get results for every analysis for printing. We can choose another type of analysis For example, McNamara analysis or Steiner-Witz analysis or Jarebek analysis. Or Burston analysis or Ricketts analysis. And conclusion of our today's meeting. Please take home message. A simplified and relevant cephalometric analysis has been developed that is applicable to planning orthodontic treatment. This analysis evaluates both hard tissue and soft tissue with both vertical as well as horizontal aspects of the face. If a prime objective of orthodontic treatment is facial improvement, soft tissue analysis becomes paramount in treatment planning. And there are shown a list of literature you can use to learn this topic deeper. And at the end of our today's meeting, doctors, my wishes to you. Don't be like these persons. But be like this man. Be strong, doctors. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.